Behind Ukrainian borders, Russia collapsing? Imagine losing a fight to that kid you thought you could beat anytime. That's crazy, right? The shame, humiliation, one can only imagine. Talking about losing fights, it's been almost a year Russia invaded Ukraine. With what we can see as spectators of this great battle, Russia isn't winning. In today's video, we're going to take a journey behind Ukrainian borders and check what's really going on. Let's go. It has been close to 12 months since Russia launched its military operation on Ukraine. There has been unimaginable loss of life. People fled homes, pets killed, and infrastructure destroyed. Now, Ukraine has claimed that Russia has lost nearly 117,000 troops since the start of the full-scale invasion in February 2022. If this turns out to be true, it will mean that Russia lost more troops than the United States did in the First World War. According to the most recent figures released by Ukraine's armed forces on Tuesday, 116,950 enemy troops have been eliminated since February 24th. The ministry also adds that 3,121 tanks and 4,877 vehicles and fuel tanks, 2,104 artillery systems belonging to Russia were also destroyed during the full-scale attack. A total of 116,516 Americans lost their lives in World War I, with 53,402 of them dying in battle and the remaining 63,114 succumbing to non-combat related causes, primarily influenza, while serving in Europe. Russian casualties had now surpassed the number of Americans killed in the Korean War, 1950 to 1953, which amounted to 36,516. It is to be noted 58,220 Americans were killed in the Vietnam War, which took place from 1955 to 1975. Russian casualties, according to Ukrainian reports, greatly outnumbered those in the Soviet Union's 1979 invasion and occupation of Afghanistan, the two Chechen wars in the 1990s and 2000s, the 2008 Russo-Georgian War, and Moscow's participation in the Syrian Civil War, the outlet further noted. Less than 6,000 troop deaths have been officially reported by Russia during the war, which is currently nearing a year. Is Russia losing the war? The head of the UK's army forces says Russia is losing in Ukraine, offering a blunt assessment of the state of the war as Moscow's unprovoked invasion creeps towards its 10-month mark. Russia is losing, and the free world is winning, Admiral Sir Tony Radakin, the United Kingdom's Chief of Defense Staff, said Wednesday during a speech at the Royal United Services Institute think tank in London. Radakin ripped into Russia over the invasion, which he decreed as tragic, dangerous, illegal, and unjustified, but Radakin underscored that Moscow is failing in the war, adding that it will only get worse for Russia. Russia is estimated to have suffered roughly 100,000 casualties in the war so far, an astonishing number in less than a year of fighting. On top of manpower issues, which Russian President Vladimir Putin sought to address via a partial military mobilization that did not go well, Russian forces are also running low on proper equipment and ammunition. When Vladimir Putin launched the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, he was expecting a quick and decisive victory that could cement his place in Russian history and reverse the verdict of 1991 by extinguishing Ukrainian independence once and for all. Instead, the year draws to a close with his army demoralized by successive defeats and Russia's reputation as a military superpower in tatters. In the first days of the invasion, it soon became clear that things were not going according to plan. Far from greeting Russian troops as liberators, the Ukrainian nation rose up in defiance. Kremlin intelligence forecasts predicting the rapid collapse of the Ukrainian military also proved widely inaccurate. On the contrary, Ukrainian forces fought back with unexpected skill and ferocity, leading to catastrophic Russian losses. By the end of March, Russia had conceded defeat in the Battle of Kyiv and withdrawn entirely from northern Ukraine. Putin responded to this setback by regrouping his decimated forces in eastern Ukraine and concentrating on completing the occupation of the Donbas region. Despite initial success due to Russia's overwhelming artillery advantage, this offensive had largely stalled by mid-summer, with the initiative passing to Ukraine. The second half of 2022 was marked by a series of spectacular Ukrainian victories. Russian troops were routed to the Kharkiv region and forced to retreat from the strategically important southern cities of Kherson, the only Ukrainian regional capital to be occupied by Russia. The withdrawal from Kherson was a personal humiliation for Putin. Just weeks earlier, he had hosted a lavish annexation ceremony in the Kremlin and proclaimed that Kherson had joined Russia forever. Unable to make progress on the battlefield, Putin changed tack in October and ordered the methodical destruction of Ukraine's civilian infrastructure. Waves of airstrikes featuring missiles and kamikaze drones have since plunged Ukraine into darkness while depriving millions of Ukrainians of heating, water, and electricity. This bombing campaign is causing great hardship, but does not appear to be undermining Ukraine's fighting spirit. While the Russian dictator's dreams of a historic victory have failed to materialize, he is not yet ready to admit defeat. In September, Putin announced his country's first mobilization since World War II, allowing him to add a further 300,000 men to his depleted invasion force. Additional waves of mobilization are possible in the coming months. On the home front, the Russian economy is being prepared for the rigors of a long war. Nor is there any sign of significant domestic unrest. Polls indicate that most Russians continue to support the invasion, while those who do not have largely remained silent or chosen exile over protest. There is currently no end in sight to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Kremlin officials insist Moscow will achieve its objectives, while Western leaders are equally adamant that Russia must not be allowed to succeed. Meanwhile, the vast majority of Ukrainians see the war as a fight for national survival against an open, genocidal enemy. This leaves little room for negotiations or a compromised peace. What's going on currently? The main war battlefields have shifted to the east of Ukraine in Donetsk and Luhansk, regions around Bakhmut and Svatovo, which are relatively small but important for further plans of both sides. To proceed with the liberation of the Luhansk region, Ukrainian army needs to have some success near Svatovo. For Russian aggressors, Bakhmut is the place they need to control to proceed with further aggression in the Donetsk region. The most significant Russian losses, about 500 soldiers killed each day, are happening in Donetsk and Luhansk regions, where Russians are using newly mobilized men, Stalin style, pushing them to front attack on the Ukrainian defense lines, which leads to hundreds of deaths from the Russian side each day. So far, it seems that Russians did not make any progress and have continued to perform the same type of attacks near Bakhmut for the 6th month without any results. The defense of Bakhmut by Ukrainians will be in the military tactics book in the future. In the south, in Kherson and Zaporizhzhia regions, the situation temporarily stabilized after the liberation of Kherson because of the weather conditions, heavy rains, snow, and very high moisture. It affects the soil in the region that does not allow the use of heavy machinery or tanks. This weather is good for the defense, but bad for the offense. Unfortunately, the Russian army continues to practice terrorism against the Ukrainian civilian population. There are constant attacks and shelling by Russian aggressors in the bordering regions of Ukraine, such as the Sumy and Kharkiv regions, as well as Kherson and Zaporizhzhia, Donetsk, and Luhansk. These little wins, or should we call it an impressive run by Ukraine, is being made possible with the aid of some countries in the West. Let's take a look at some of these helpers. Who is providing military assistance? The US is the largest provider of military assistance to Ukraine, having committed $27.4 billion since the start of the Biden administration. $26.7 billion of that assistance has been provided since February 2022. As the second largest donor, the UK has committed $2.3 billion in military assistance to Ukraine so far, and has pledged to match that assistance in 2023. The UK is also hosting a training program, Operation Interflex, which is supported by several allies, with the aim of training 10,000 new and existing Ukrainian personnel within 120 days. NATO as an alliance has been clear in its political support of Ukraine and fully supports the provision of bilateral military assistance by individual allies. NATO is helping to coordinate requests for assistance from the Ukrainian government and is supporting the delivery of humanitarian and non-lethal aid. Ukraine is not a NATO member, however, and therefore isn't party to NATO's Mutual Defense Clause under Article 5 of the North Atlantic Treaty. As such, NATO troops will not be deployed on the ground in Ukraine. Allies have also ruled out imposing a no-fly zone over Ukraine because it would bring Russia into direct conflict with NATO forces. At the Heads of State and Government Summit in Madrid at the end of June 2022, NATO allies agreed a new package of assistance for Ukraine that will provide long-term, sustained support. The European Union is also providing non-lethal and lethal arms through its European Peace Facility, EPF. This is the first time the bloc has, in its history, approved the supply of lethal weapons to a third country. To date, the EU has committed 3.6 billion euros in October 2022. The EU also approved a new training mission for the Ukrainian armed forces. Having discussed the state of affairs, who's winning, and countries that has provided aid, how do you think the war is going to end? A Russian surrender? A peace treaty? What happens if Russia loses? Share your thoughts in the comment section. Hit the subscribe button if you haven't done so. Tap the bell icon to get notification about our next video on who will come out on top between Russia and Ukraine.